yeah, so generally, tomorrow I'll get on a little bit late, but then we're going to do 24 hours and go for leveling up Duelist in PoE 1. We're going to keep that Lightning Strike build going. So far, the leveling process on it has been not great. I've never leveled a Duelist since, like, actually learning the game, because it's my first real league where I learned the game, which was Crucibles when I first started, like, going deep into the game. I think the first time I played was Calandra, maybe the one before that. Mainly, I'm just going to level that Duelist. I'm not following any leveling guide or anything. I'm just discovering the leveling process. So far, I'm using Splitting Steel, but it's not going great. I'm not going to play PoE 2 anymore. Oh yeah, so... Okay. I'm not going to play... Yeah, okay. You kind of hit the nail on the head there. So I'm not really going to be playing PoE 2 anymore. At least not for now, for a couple main reasons. My main reason, first and foremost above everything else, I am too goddamn fucking slow. Oh my god, it pisses me off how goddamn slow you are in that fucking game. It is so annoying. Like, I understand the philosophy there. Like, it's like Dark Souls, Elden Ring inspired type shit where it's, you're not supposed to be super quick. PoE 1, I fully agree. We move way too quick. It's not healthy for the game to keep it that way. That's fine. Change it. Why is it this bad? Why do I need to, and I'm not saying anything unique here, everyone's voice is opinion, but why am I playing PoE 2 where I need to have 35 or 30% movement speed on my boots, and I'm cooked? And then boom, 30% movement speed, or it's trash boots. No other item in the game has this. No other item in PoE history has this. And PoE 1 has this problem, where there's going to be very, very, very few builds. If there's any builds at all in PoE 1, I would be surprised. Because in PoE 1, this is a problem too, right? In PoE 1, we still need, it's necessitated that we have movement speed on our boots. But on PoE 2, because, okay, let me explain why. In PoE 1, if you don't have movement speed on your boots, you're just not keeping up at the end game. Emphasis on that. You need them at the end game. It's what makes high-level boots. But I don't have nearly as much of a problem with that in end game. I have 3 problems with PoE 2's boots that aren't in PoE 1. So let's discuss the 3 reasons why I am fine with the way boots are designed in PoE 1 versus how they are in PoE 2. Firstly, the item can still be salvageable without top-tier movement speed. If it has 20-25% movement speed, that's actually worse than having 0, which is a reason I'll get into as number 3. But an item without a movement speed can open up you up to a suffix that can do different things for you. Whether that's spell suppression, a different life roll, and a prefix, depending on how you want to craft it, depending on what you're doing in terms of crafting, which is we'll get into later. That suffix can do a lot for you. Spell suppression, resistances, stuff more specific to your build. Like, that makes it so that you don't need them. You do need them. It's prohibitive to not have them when you get into later game maps. But you're not so goddamn worried about getting as much movement speed as possible in the campaign. If you're super twinked out and you're trying to level up as fast as you can for either league start or you're doing another character within the same league, then yes, absolutely, you're going to be like, movement speed, movement speed, movement speed. But in order for the actual game to be fun, before you get into endgame maps, you do not need the movement speed. It's not necessary. It's very helpful and will be needed later on. But for number 2, you know what else is needed later on? Life, mana if you're a caster, fizz reduction if you're a melee character, resistances if you're anyone. Like, there are certain things, and while I do agree with GGG's philosophy regarding core mechanics becoming core, or necessary mechanics becoming core, there is a certain point in which that can't happen. And those points for me are, in PoE 1, resistances, life rolls, mana rolls if you're a caster, fizz reduction if you're melee, and movement speed. Because it makes sense that your boots make you quicker. And it makes sense that in a game as fast as PoE, you need to get quicker boots. That's fine. And I actually like it because it adds additional suffix pressure that doesn't feel artificial. If fucking gloves had movement speed, that would feel stupid. But the fact that it's boots that have movement speed, which takes away a mandatory suffix, meaning that you have less room to fuck around with your spell suppressions and your resistances, is good for the game's gear balance. Genuinely, I think it's good for the game's gear balance. Compare that to PoE 2, where in PoE 2, you still have life rolls, you still have resistances, you still have everything else. You fundamentally cannot play the game. without movement speed. And that's what I think is another issue, is in PoE 1, you don't feel bad for not having movement speed. In PoE 2, it is a genuine detriment to the game's feeling, because you are so slow in this game. So slow. To the point where not having as early as Act 1 10% movement speed, the game feels wrong. It feels like the game hates you. And third, the game does hate you because of the crafting system. In PoE 1, and before I get into any of this, just to clarify, right? I'm not asking for determinate, harvest, influence, eldritch, all this bullshit, determinate crafting with veiled orbs, nothing. I don't need 3 crafted modifiers on an item. That's not necessary. I'm not asking for that. What I'm asking for is anything other than I get a base item, I transmute it, I Orb of Chance it, or whatever the fuck the one that adds a modifier on, I forgot the name of it. So I scour it so it's white, transmute it, put another modifier on it, regal, exalt until I have 6. That's the only way to craft. You're gambling. And then at that point, you either scour it, restart, or you chaos it. That's like, what? Why? That's like basic level. You have 20 hours in PoE 1 crafting. PoE 2 needs to add something. And I understand why it's like this. Because the game is in early access. Endgame has been worked on since maybe. And I mean maybe since the release of Calgar. Maybe. And it's probably been since maybe Necro Settlers, like a couple months. Like, it's not a lot of time that they had to work on this. But it still makes the game feel bad when, if I don't drop movement speed on the item, I either spend a bunch of currency gambling to get it, or the item is trash. And the game feels so bad without it. That's prohibitive to me. In the same way that I understand that resistances are also prohibitive, but I fundamentally disagree with the way that we go about it in PoE 2. Now, the second main reason that I'm not a huge fan of PoE 2 is the lack of phasing. So, if you're not familiar, phasing refers to the idea that you are able to at least kind of go through monsters. So for example, in PoE 1, I feel like I'm able to slip between small cracks between enemies, and at a higher level, I'm using the Quartz Flask or whatever, which one gives you plus 10% chance to spell suppression, and then you get to phase. Phasing is kind of necessary for late game, because there's so much shit on the fucking screen at any given time that if you're not able to go through the enemies, you just go, I died. Or the shit that made me stop playing casters in PoE 1, the shit that made me stop playing my Ice Nova of Frostbolts build, is I'm so fucking annoyed when I don't have suppression up, or I don't have phasing up, or I feel like my phasing's not working correctly, and then the moment it does start working correctly, I'm frozen. That's why I'm starting to play Lightning Strike Slayer, is I feel like it's a little bit more tanky, a little bit better ailment avoid compared to Ice Nova of Frostbolts, and maybe it's just a skill issue. It could very much be a skill issue, but I feel like in PoE 2, the ailments are 10 times more annoying, because when I try to avoid them, I'm fucking eating this zombie's dick because I can't move through him. I can't move around him because he's fucking county-sized. So if I try to move around him, I'm done. If I try and move within his, like, horde, I'm done. If I try to move backwards, there's more of them back there because I feel like enemies keep spawning and there's way too many enemies for how tight it was, at least in Act 1. I feel like at points there were too many enemies compared to my power level. Which could very much be that I'm bad at playing a caster and I wanted to play Infernalist. Maybe I should jump back into the game as Monk. But at the current point, I don't want to do that. Because I feel so slow. Even with my movement speed affixes on my boots, I feel slow as shit. Compared to PoE 1. And I'm used to PoE 1. And I understand that's going to be slower than PoE 1. But does it need to be this much slower than PoE 1? And at the very least, if we're going to have movement speed be this prohibitive over the gameplay, can it not be an affix like this? I think it was Subtractum, maybe, who was talking about this, and he said we should instead have it so boots give you a natural 30% or 20% increase, and then have there be an implicit on all boots that can be rolled with a Blessed Orb that's 7 to 12% above that. So instead of going from 0 to 30, you go from 20 to, or 27 to 32. So it's another item to roll. It gives a purpose to Blessed Orbs, which are kind of fucking pointless in PoE 1. It lets you have affixes on your boots, and it lets the game move on as normal. Because if the game is going to be this much harder, I feel like it makes more sense for there to be another affix opened up on your gear. Because in PoE 1, the game is fundamentally not difficult until we start getting into number scaling. In terms of actual enemy design and kind of the boss designs, the bosses are genuinely difficult, but some of them aren't, especially map bosses. Sometimes aren't difficult. In that game, it makes more sense to have affix pressure influencing difficulty. In PoE 2, where the entire game, I just feel like the design of PoE 2 is not conclusive with movement speed on boots. And then that influences how annoying getting body blocked is to me. I dislike that. I'm not a fan. But what I do like about PoE 2 is that I'm getting a lot of use out of multiple skills and the combos in skills. The most I ever felt this in PoE 1 was this league with Ice Nova Frostbolts. Other than that, I've always run one-button builds. It's always Bone Shatter and then maybe your Ancestral Call or your banners or whatever the fuck, or your auras reservations. Speaking of reservations, I also like the Spirit system. But that doesn't offset the fact that I feel like I can't move. I feel like I'm prohibited from moving around enemies. And also, I just don't think that this type of difficulty is for me. Truthfully. Like, I'm not a Dark Souls fan. I need to play Elden Ring, but I haven't. I feel like if I played Elden Ring or Dark Souls, I would like PoE 2 way more, because PoE 2 is very clearly inspired almost entirely by these games. With the dodge roll mechanic, with how slow you are, how the combat feels, it all feels like what I hear these games described as. And I think that lack of context for me is hurting my experience, and I also think that I'm bad at the game, and that's hurting my experience. But I don't think that being bad at the game should be unfun in this way. I think that's bad design. Because I quit at the end of Act 1. And if the game is this prohibitively unfun when you're bad at it, it doesn't give people the opportunity to learn it. And for me, I'm going to play this game at least 400 or 500 hours. And I'm going to learn it. I'm just not doing it in early access. I want them to get all of their ideas out before I commit myself to a game that is in a type of difficulty I'm not used to, with mechanics that I'm not familiar with the context of, and with many concept design ideas that I think are going to be good, but aren't currently good. Like, for example, the way that gold works, I don't think is good. Because I'm in Act 1, and I'm using my gold only to gamble. And later down the line, I'll respec with it. That's it. I haven't gotten to the point where I can currency exchange, none of that shit. But I don't even fucking use it at the vendors, which is the whole point of it. I don't actually use it at the goddamn vendors, even in Act 1. I just take it to fucking Finn, and I just gamble it 12 times in a row, and then I get pissed at the game when I don't get the shit I want, and then I fuck off. Like, what is the point of adding currency, or of adding gold, in a game that was completely built off the fact that there wasn't gold? But I think gold could work well if they give it more uses, which I think they're going to do with League mechanics. So I'm excited to play the Monk when the game is more refined. I'm excited to play the Druid when the game is more refined. I want to see what the Huntress does when the game is more refined, because as Merc, I don't like Crossbow. So I want to see what Huntress has going for her. But I mean, yeah, it's... I don't think the game is flawed fundamentally. I don't think the game has a bad skeleton. I just don't think the game is for me. And I think that's fine. And I think I'm going to try and make the game work for me when it's out of early access. But in its current state, it just doesn't click in my brain. So yeah, that's why I'm not going to be playing PoE 2 anymore on stream. You know, I'll just wait until League's economy resets everything. But yeah, and I guess I might as well be putting this up on YouTube. So like, bye guys.